Hi, everyone. This
Hi.
is Stephen Mance. I'm here as the host of Brooklyn Community Democracy Channel, BCDC. And with me today is my good friend and co-host, David Rosenfeld. Good to have you here, David.
Hi, Steve. Good to be here.
Good to hear you. And today we're going to discuss native plants. David has been working on some very interesting projects, so we're going to hear all about that today. So, David, firstly, thank you for being here. So, tell us about native plants and tell us what's the goal of your project.
So the goal of my project is to encourage planting of native plants, and particularly in either unused or underutilized spaces, in private or public spaces, in commercial spaces, front lawns, back lawns, any area though, to replace, to the extent possible, the lawn or the prepared garden with native plants.
What do people normally plant that you want to replace now?
Well, I'd like to do an entire separately video actually about lawns and the lawn. So we're talking about really replacing to some extent the lawn, a typical lawn, or a flower garden that includes plants that are not native plants, flowers, typical flowers.
Right, tropical flowers,
Tropical
or roses,
flowers, or
tulips, everything.
Exactly. Right. Any plants that are not native, with native plants. That would be my goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. Very cool. So tell us, what are native plants? Tell us a little bit about that.
So native plants, like you might say the same thing, for example, for native animals, or indigenous would be a better word, and you can use that for people as well. These are plants that evolved in that region, wherever you're planting them. So they've evolved with the animal population, they've evolved with the predators, they've evolved with the pollinators, and they are originally from that location, wherever that location may be.
Right, so there's a whole ecosystem that these plants evolved in, flourished in, were cultivated in. And like I do recall, there's a park in Manhattan near New York University. It's a block right on the LaGuardia Place, but it says here, this park is full of the native plants that would have been found by the first colonists and the first settlers. So that's what you're referring to.
Exactly, right. You'll find native plants gardens all over. The Brooklyn Botanic Gardens has an entire native plant section. Others do as well. Right. It's become a known thing, a practice to plant native plants, and there are suppliers and so on. But exactly what you said, right? There's an entire ecosystem that's grown up that's been taken away, destroyed by civilization, where we've come in and sort of kind of done our own thing, put our own fingerprint, and we realize that we just can't do it better than nature has done it in the first place. So we're kind of going back to that again, which is a smart thing to do.
Very good. So tell me that, like, what are some of the benefits native plants have for the environment now that we're going to start embarking on this?
And we'll give you the negative and the positive. The negative in that what they do not contribute, and the positive in what they do contribute. What they do not contribute, what I'm referring to as native, as a negative, is that you do not have to water them. And water is, of course, we know everywhere fresh water is a valuable resource, but there are parts of the country in the West and Midwest and so on where water is very scarce. So certainly to not have to water the plants is helpful. You don't have to apply artificial fertilizer, herbicides to kill weeds, and pesticides to kill pests.
So you're telling me a native plant, even one that requires human cultivation, because it evolved here in our region, we're referring to our own region, you're saying it wouldn't even need necessarily more water than it would naturally get from the environment. It wouldn't necessarily need more fertilizer than just naturally occurs on our soil?
Right, for the most part that's true. Now last summer, you may remember, we actually did have a long-term drought here, and in a situation like that, then some supplemental water is helpful. But under normal conditions, that's exactly right. That's the idea. You don't have to add artificial fertilizer, you don't have to add pesticides, herbicides, or water.
Amazing. Wow. So we could explore native plants. You'd be able to tell me either they have defenses or else they're just naturally, they're immune to some degree from pests, various natural hazards in the environment just by being part of this ecosystem.
Right. They've grown up with that ecosystem. They've evolved with that ecosystem, and they've evolved to defend themselves against onslaught from whether parasites or predators, herbivores, and so on. Yes, that's all naturally built into the system by evolution. Right?
Very cool. Excellent. Okay, so I think you've told us some advantages to the environment. Are there separate advantages to gardening for the average person who wants to garden to do a native plant?
Right, so that's the other side of it. What you will get from native plants, besides what you don't have to contribute negatively to the environment, what you will get. So you can attract all kinds of animals that you might want to attract, hummingbirds, butterflies. In fact, this is really, now we're calling it a native plants garden, but for decades, there's always been something called a butterfly garden that you can go back to. And that's really what this is. So you can attract butterflies, as I mentioned, hummingbirds. Now we're also looking to attract bees and other pollinators. Sometimes people have a negative impression of bees, but we shouldn't anymore. We can attract them, and that's a good thing. And all kinds of other pollinators, and these are only the invertebrates. You can have vertebrates as well. You can attract birds, migratory birds, hummingbirds, native birds. But the point is native birds. We're not talking about introduced birds that you can put out. If you put out bird seed and get them, you want to attract the native birds there. So basically an entire animal population, besides just the beauty of it. You look at a garden that's blooming. My gardens, when I get the mixture of seeds, they're designed to bloom throughout the entire growing season. So we'll get some coming up at the end of May. They'll die. More will come up through June, July, August, September, and October. So the beauty and the aesthetics is part of that.
Wow. So what's the growing season? Any season other than the dead of winter, like when there's anything other than freezing cold? Is that all the growing season?
Well, typically for native plants, we plant in the fall because some of the seeds need to be exposed to the very cold weather for a period of time. So we plant in the fall. Those seeds will, for the perennials should reseed themselves. But they will sprout. Generally, I've had mine sprout. Remember, the region is also important, where we are. Mine have generally been coming up late May, early June. But then they will keep coming up. People are amazed that they will come up, not only the same colors, but other flowers, all through, I would say generally through October.
Perfect. Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, so you've already begun telling us some of the factors when planting native plant garden, but tell us more about that. What are some of the factors when you're actually doing the planting?
Right, so what you need to do in order to plant, just briefly now, because it's an entire process, but what I do is generally I prepare the soil, meaning I till the soil, get any rocks away from it, any other roots, any weeds that are there, take those out. I will plant, again, you have to know to plant when, just at the right time. Once the soil, of course, cannot be frozen, but on the other hand, you don't want a warm spell because then you may have sprouting and then dying off again. Okay. So it's that kind of a window in our area. It really depends on where you're living and what plants you're using. But in our area, I generally do that in November, right? Very late fall. But that's really all you need to do at that point.
Plant in November.
Right, plant in November.
And what happens then? So you're saying during the cold season, December, January, February, the seeds are germinating even if it's cold?
They're dormant.
Okay.
But they need to be dormant, and they need to be exposed to the cold. Stratification. It's called stratification.
Okay.
So, and they're dormant. So to prepare the soil, now generally what you might want to do is you might want to know about the quality of your soil. So you might want to study, is my soil in my area, is it acidic? Is it basic? Do I need to modify it that way? And you basically you learn about what kind of seeds you want to plant, and you can order the seeds. You prepare the soil, as I do, and in order to put the seeds in, you don't dig the seeds in. I just walk over the seeds. Walk over the seeds.
Wow. Or
lightly. There are materials that you can use to gently cover the seeds. Now, of course, we're talking about, my area is about 20 by 20 feet. If you're doing an entire meadow, that's something different. You may need some machinery. If you're doing a flower pot, that's something else also. So you can do this again. That's wonderful. You can do it on a terrace. You could do it on a porch. You could do it in a small plot, or you could do an entire meadow. But mine, both in the front and the back, are about 15 by 20 and 20 by 20 feet. So in that area, what I'm telling you is correct. You till the soil, take away any rocks, any other weeds. Make sure the weeds are gone, so that you don't have the competition for these. Put it in and then I re-till the soil. I till the soil earlier in the fall, and then when I'm about ready to plant, and then plant the seeds later in, like I say, late November, around Thanksgiving usually, and then you're just waiting for those to come up. Once they've come up, the work to do then is to You generally water them at the beginning, actually, when they're first sprouting. We do water a little bit in the early spring, and we weed. That's one thing we have to do. We get the weeds out.
Okay, so you're planting them early in the fall season to get them into the natural cycle of the seasons.
Exactly.
And then that way, when it's warm, that's when they actually begin to sprout.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Wow. Okay, so where can we purchase native plant seeds?
So what's wonderful is that different than it was, say, 30 years ago. Today, they're very available, available from many different types of suppliers. For example, the National Wildlife Federation sells them. Sometimes there are giveaways. I've been using a private company called American Meadows, which is out of Vermont. They and other companies, but they have very good telephone assistance, the website, tutorials on planting, and videos. And I know other sites do as well. So there are different organizations like National Wildlife Federation. There are companies.
Are some of them specific to a specific region, and others are all the different regions, or are they generally all universal?
Right, so that's a good question. So you need to know your region. A company like American Meadows, you can choose on the website from your region. So even though they're based in Vermont, you can choose if you're Western, you can choose Midwestern, East, Northeast, Southeast, and so on. So you can choose, and they will have seed varieties, or you can also get specific plants. So I get generally mixtures, but you can get, for example, only milkweeds.
Tell us some of the plants that are common to our region that you recommend.
Well, for example, the entire milkweed family, which is Asclepias. Those are very important for monarch butterflies. The monarch butterfly caterpillar only survives on the milkweed. And now with all the development, not only here in New York, but around the country and around the world, so much of this has been taken away that the monarch butterfly has actually been listed as endangered.
So can we help the monarch butterfly by planting the seed? How would this help them?
We can by planting the milkweed. That would have something for the caterpillars to eat and for the caterpillar seeds to be for the caterpillars to grow up on, for the eggs to be laid on. So that's just one type of plant. But any of the native plants, I mean, there's the coneflower, and in this area, any native flowering plants are very important for the birds. You can mention any number of them: goldfinches, a whole list of native sparrows that would be eating the seeds.
So this is actually their specific food source for the native species, and we can help them flourish.
Exactly. In fact, a lot of the sources that I'm reading, it's very popular to put out bird seeds. A lot of sources I'm reading are saying it's actually preferable to use native plants to have the birds and invertebrates as well get their food that way. Wow. So that it really is. So
why is that? Because it's healthier, or
putting out seeds or putting out bird food comes with a whole host of issues. It's not like it's always problematic, but there are many, many issues. For example, other animals that are not wanted may come: bears, raccoons, opossums, squirrels. Birds will naturally will artificially gather in large groups, and if there's any disease to be spread, then that can be spread that way as a result of that. Also, bird feeders.
You don't want that,
right? We wouldn't want that, and it does happen. Also, bird feeders must be taken care of carefully, or they will spread disease. They'll get
could be a repository.
Could be a depository for this, exactly. So, in order to avoid all of that, and again, there are times for bird feeders and different types of food. But in order to avoid that, and also to avoid dependence of the animals, birds or any other animals, on human feeding.
Right. If you're giving them something that's artificially introduced, they won't know where else to find it.
Exactly. And they may even start, in fact, birds have even stopped doing normal, engaging in normal migration patterns because they have the food, why should they migrate? They have the food where it is, and that's problematic for birds. It becomes detrimental to the species. So there are, not to say at all that one should not feed, but I'm saying that these are the certain advantages to using native plants, and if somebody is feeding birds or other animals, that has to be done with some background knowledge.
Fascinating. Okay, and what do we do to prepare the soil for native plant seeds? You already told us a little about the gardening, but there's something specific that actually needs to happen with the soil itself to make these plants grow?
Well, we're fortunate in Brooklyn. We actually have very good soil. Wow. It's actually very good soil, so we don't have to do too much. There are types of soil, and you can test the soil. If it's too acidic, somebody might have to add lime or something to make it less acidic. I'm not sure if soils are generally too basic, but if it's basic, you'd have to neutralize. In other words, we have to neutralize the soil. Certainly, a soil has to be loose, as we mentioned before. It has to be tilled and loose. The plants need to be able to, the seeds need to be able to get in and grow.
Right.
So
physical factor is just the actual physical growth. It has to have room and looseness to expand.
Right. And one other point that I forgot to mention before, neglected to mention, is when you're getting the seeds, you want to know about what your sunlight exposure is.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are very few that will take poor sunlight. There are some that are what's called shade tolerant. So if you're getting only some sunlight, you'll take certain seeds. If you're getting all full sunlight, then you can use other seeds. Just one story. I've relatives who live in Brooklyn, and my relatives had a garden. So a building was built just a couple of years ago that went very, very high next door to them.
Wow.
Their entire garden gone.
Terrible.
Completely gone.
I recall Brooklyn Botanical Garden had a whole online initiative with this very issue. But go ahead.
Exactly. And that was successful, fortunately.
Thank God, because we're very proud of them.
Exactly. So light is very important. So you should know, if you don't have full light, that's okay. You can get what's called a shade-resistant plant or shade-tolerant plants.
There are options.
Exactly,
okay.
There are options. But so know things like know your region, know your sunlight light exposure, and know your soil type. There are actually soil grades and soil types. You can know. They'll give you different regions. You can look up on one of these sites like American Meadows if you're in soil region 7. And so for example, we're in region 7. It tells you something about the soil type. So
fascinating. Yeah. Okay, well that's really great to know, and this is fantastic information. I think we're going to hopefully cover this further as the days get warmer. It's a little cold out there now, but hopefully days will get warmer. We'll cover a lot of this. I want to thank my guest David Rosenfeld for being here. This is a fascinating topic, and you can tune in for future episodes. We hope to explore this further in depth. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button. We'd be thrilled to hear your comments, and we hope to see you here again here on Brooklyn Community Democracy Channel. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, David, for being here.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Our pleasure. Bye-bye now.